In the dust-choked town of Millbrook, where hope died harder than the prairie grass, they sold daughters like cattle. Except for one girl who refused to be bought. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip across the town square, each word driving another nail into Evangeline Porter's coffin of shame. She pressed her back against the general store's weathered planks, watching her three sisters ascend that cursed platform one by one, their faces masks of resignation beneath their Sunday bonnets. Sold to Mr. Henderson for $37. The gavel struck. Margaret, barely 16, stepped down into the arms of a man twice her age whose breath reeked of whiskey and broken promises. The crowd murmured approval. Times were hard since the drought claimed 3 consecutive harvests. Fathers did what? They must to keep their families fed, even if it meant bartering their daughters' futures for a handful of silver coins. Sarah went next for $42 to a cattle rancher from the next county. Then little Beth, sweet Beth with her cornflower eyes, fetched $51 from a widower whose first wife had died under mysterious circumstances. Evangeline's fingers found the worn wooden cross at her throat. Her mother's last gift before consumption claimed her 3 winters past. The same disease that left their father, Samuel Porter, a hollow shell of the man who once sang hymns while plowing their modest fields. Evangeline Porter. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square. Last daughter of the Porter family. 19 years old, strong as a mule, can read and cipher. Bidding starts at $20. The crowd shifted restlessly. You could taste their hunger in the air, not for food, but for the spectacle of watching the last Porter girl finally broken. She'd turned down 3 marriage proposals this past year, each one more desperate than the last. The townspeople whispered. She thought herself too good for honest work, too proud for her station. They didn't understand. It wasn't pride that kept her chin high as she walked to that platform. It was the promise she'd made to her dying mother. Find love, not just survival. My darling, promise me. $20, called out Jake Morrison, the blacksmith's son. His palms were always sweaty, and he had a habit of spitting between his teeth when he talked. 25. This from Old Man Hutchins, whose last 3 wives had all died in childbirth. Evangeline's father wouldn't meet her eyes. Samuel sat hunched on a crate beside the platform, his hat pulled low, shoulders shaking with either grief or relief. The doctor bills from her mother's final months had buried them in debt deeper than any grave. $30. Jake again, his voice cracking with adolescent eagerness. The bidding stalled. $30 was good money for a bride, especially one with a reputation for stubbornness. The auctioneer raised his gavel, scanning the crowd for final offers. That's when the stranger stepped forward. He emerged from the shadows between the bank and the barber shop like smoke given form. Tall, lean, dressed in black from his boots to his wide-brimmed hat. A silver watch chain caught the afternoon light at his vest, and his hands, Evangeline noticed, were gentlemen's hands, soft and uncalloused. $100, he said quietly. The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. $100. Could buy a small farm, a dozen horses, or a year's worth of supplies. Women gasped behind their fans. Men removed their hats and stared. The auctioneer's eyes widened. Did you say $100, sir? I did. The stranger's voice carried the faint trace of an accent. Southern, perhaps, or maybe just the careful diction of education. For Miss Evangeline Porter. Every head turned toward the mysterious bidder. He was perhaps 35, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. A thin scar traced his left cheek from ear to jaw, and when he smiled, which he did now, looking directly at Evangeline, it never quite reached those unsettling eyes. Sir, the auctioneer stammered, might I ask your name? For the records. Thomas. Blackwood. He touched the brim of his hat. I own the old Hartwell place, up on Devil's Ridge. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Hartwell place had been abandoned for 5 years, ever since the family mysteriously vanished one winter night. Folks said it was cursed, that the wind through those empty rooms sounded like crying. $100, the auctioneer repeated, his voice gaining strength. Going once, going twice. Evangeline felt the world tilt sideways. $100 was freedom, but freedom to what? She studied Thomas Blackwood's face, searching for some hint of his intentions. His expression remained pleasant, almost amused. as if he found the entire proceeding mildly entertaining. Sold. The gavel fell with finality. Miss Evangeline Porter. To Mr. Thomas Blackwood for $100. The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Evangeline's knees threatened to buckle. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She'd prepared herself for Jake Morrison's sweaty palms or Old Man Hutchins' yellowed teeth, not this enigmatic stranger who bid on her like she was some rare treasure. Thomas Blackwood approached the platform, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden steps. Up close, she could see the fine fabric of his suit, the careful trim of his mustache, the way his eyes seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance. Miss Porter. He offered his hand to help her down from the platform. His touch was warm, steady, and surprisingly gentle. I believe we have some matters to discuss. Her father finally looked up, his weathered face a map of guilt and gratitude. Mr. Blackwood, sir. That is, my daughter is what, Mr. Porter? Thomas's voice remained pleasant, but something sharp glinted in his eyes. She's got strong opinions, sir. Headstrong. Might not make the easiest wife. I'm not looking for easy, Mr. Porter. Thomas's smile widened, and for a moment, Evangeline glimpsed something predatory in his expression. I'm looking for interesting. The crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment concluded. Her sisters were already being led away by their new husbands, disappearing into lives she might never know. The weight of absolute isolation settled on her shoulders like a burial shroud, but as Thomas Blackwood offered her his arm, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. But the most unsettling detail wasn't his mysterious wealth or his gentleman's manners. It was the way he kept glancing toward the old cemetery, as if expecting someone to emerge from among the weathered headstones. The buckboard ride to Devil's Ridge passed in suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic creak of leather and the hollow clop of hooves against hardpan earth. Evangeline clutched her mother's Bible, her only possession beyond the faded blue dress she wore, and studied her new husband from beneath lowered lashes. Thomas Blackwood sat with the easy grace of a man accustomed to control, his hands steady on the reins despite the treacherous mountain path. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick hair that caught the dying sunlight like polished obsidian. The scar along his cheek seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, a silver thread of violence in an otherwise refined face. You're wondering about this. His fingers traced the old wound without taking his eyes from the road. Most folks do. Heat crept up Evangeline's neck. I wasn't. Confederate saber during the siege of Vicksburg. His voice held no emotion, as if discussing the weather. The man who gave it to me died 30 seconds later. The casual way he mentioned killing chilled her more than the mountain wind. She pulled her thin shawl tighter and forced herself to speak. You fought for the South. I fought for survival, Miss Porter. Same as everyone else. He glanced at her then, those storm gray eyes unreadable. Though I suppose it's Mrs. Blackwood now, isn't it? The name felt foreign on her tongue, like swallowing stones. We haven't. That is, there was no ceremony. No. Thomas's smile was sharp as winter. The auctioneer seemed to think otherwise. $100 buys a great deal of ceremony in these parts. Shame burned in her chest. She'd always imagined her wedding day would involve orange blossoms and her mother's pearl necklace, not a public auction and a stranger's cold transaction. In God's eyes, we're not married. God's eyes see a great many things, Mrs. Blackwood. Not all of them pleasant. The buckboard rounded a sharp bend, and the Hartwell place came into view. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. The house rose from the rocky plateau like a fever dream. 3 stories of weathered wood and broken promises, its windows dark as dead eyes. A wraparound porch sagged under the weight of neglect, and the few remaining shutters hung at drunken angles. But it was the garden that truly shocked her. Where she'd expected weeds and desolation, rows of vegetables stretched in perfect lines. Tomatoes heavy with fruit, corn stalks tall as a man, squash vines sprawling in ordered abundance. Someone had been tending this land with meticulous care. Surprised, Thomas helped her down from the buckboard, his hands lingering a moment too long at her waist. Most folks expect a haunted ruin. The garden. She whispered. I've been here 3 months, preparing. He shouldered her small bundle of belongings. A man needs proper soil to grow proper crops. Same principle applies to wives. The comparison made her skin crawl. but she followed him up the porch steps, noting how the boards had been recently reinforced despite their weathered appearance. The front door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing an interior that defied the house's exterior decay. Rich burgundy curtains framed spotless windows. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, its brass pendulum catching lamplight like a hypnotist's watch. The air smelled of lemon oil and something else, something floral and faintly sweet. How? The word escaped before she could stop it. Money buys many things, Mrs. Blackwood. Privacy, discretion, the services of craftsmen who ask no questions. Thomas set her bundle on a mahogany side table that probably cost more than her father's annual income. I trust you'll find the accommodations adequate. Adequate? The parlor alone was grander than the finest house in Millbrook. Crystal decanters lined a sidebar, their contents gleaming like liquid amber. Books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves, more books than she'd seen in her entire life. And everywhere, the scent of roses, though she saw no flowers. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. Thomas moved to the sidebar and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. Mine is at the end of the hall. I trust you understand the arrangement. Arrangement? I purchased a wife, not a whore. He raised the glass in a mock toast. Your virtue remains your own, Mrs. Blackwood. For now. The casual cruelty of his words struck her like a physical blow. She'd expected many things from this. Forced marriage, brutality, perhaps, or desperate loneliness. But this cold politeness, this gentleman's facade wrapped around something darker, was far more terrifying. Why? The question burst from her lips. Why $100? Why me? Thomas studied her over the rim of his glass, those gray eyes cataloging every detail of her appearance. You interest me. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you'll receive tonight. He drained the whiskey and set the glass aside. Mrs. Chun has prepared supper. You'll find her in the kitchen. Follow the hall past the dining room. She speaks little English, but she understands enough. Mrs. Chun, my housekeeper. She came, with certain recommendations. His smile was winter-sharp. I suggest you retire early, Mrs. Blackwood. Tomorrow we begin your education. Education? But Thomas was already climbing the stairs, his boots echoing in the vast space. Second door on the right, he called without turning. And Mrs. Blackwood? I'd avoid wandering the house after dark. Some rooms are better left undisturbed. Evangeline stood alone in the opulent parlor, her mother's Bible clutched against her chest like armor. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, each note reverberating through the silence like a death knell. Somewhere deeper in the house, she could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps and the distant clatter of dishes. She made her way down the hallway, past oil paintings of stern-faced strangers and landscapes that seemed to shift in the lamplight. The dining room was elegant as a cathedral, long mahogany table, crystal chandelier, walls lined with more books. But it was the portrait above the mantelpiece that stopped her cold that a woman with raven-black hair and eyes like winter storms gazed down at her. The resemblance to Thomas was unmistakable, the same aristocratic features, the same sharp intelligence. But there was something else in the painted woman's expression, something that made Evangeline's skin crawl. The woman in the portrait was smiling, but her eyes held the flat, predatory gleam of a serpent. You see the resemblance? Evangeline spun around, heart hammering. A small Chinese woman stood in the doorway, her black hair streaked with silver, her dark eyes unreadable. She wore a simple gray dress and moved with the silent grace of a cat. Mrs. Chun. The woman nodded once. You eat now. Mr. Thomas, he say you must eat. The portrait, who is she? Mrs. Chin's expression didn't change, but her hands, Evangeline noticed, were trembling slightly. First Mrs. Blackwood. She very beautiful. Very. The woman searched for words. Very hungry. Hungry. But Mrs. Chun was already moving away, her footsteps eerily silent on the hardwood floor. You eat now, she repeated, before the house gets restless. But as Evangeline followed the mysterious housekeeper toward the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in the portrait was watching her every move, and that somewhere in this house of secrets, the first Mrs. Blackwood was still very much alive. The scream that shattered the pre-dawn silence wasn't human. Evangeline bolted upright in the 4-poster bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound came again, a keening wail that seemed to rise from the earth itself, echoing through the floorboards and rattling the crystal water pitcher on her nightstand as she'd barely slept. The room Thomas had given her was luxurious beyond imagination: silk wallpaper, a marble wash basin, windows draped in velvet that cost more than most folks' homes. But luxury couldn't mask the wrongness that permeated this house like smoke. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only the tick of the grandfather clock downstairs and the whisper of wind through the eaves. Evangeline wrapped her mother's quilt around her shoulders and crept to the window. The eastern sky was just beginning to blush with dawn, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Below, the garden stretched in perfect rows, but something was different. A figure moved between the corn stalks, tall, dressed in white, gliding rather than walking. Evangeline pressed her face to the glass, trying to make out details. The figure paused at the garden's edge and turned toward the house. Even from 3 stories up, she could see the pale oval of a face, the dark cascade of hair, the way the white dress seemed to float around the woman's form like grave cloth. The woman in the portrait. The first Mrs. Blackwood that a soft knock at her door made her jump. Mrs. Blackwood. Mrs. Chin's voice was barely above a whisper. You come now. Breakfast ready. Evangeline threw on her dress and yanked open the door. Mrs. Chin stood in the hallway, her face pale as winter moonlight. Did you hear? You hear nothing. The housekeeper's voice was sharp as broken glass. You see nothing. Is better this way. But the woman in the garden, no woman. Mrs. Chin's black eyes were fierce. Only shadows. Only tricks of light. You understand. Before Evangeline could respond, Mrs. Chun was already moving down the hallway, her footsteps silent as a ghost's. Evangeline followed, her mind reeling. She'd seen what she'd seen, heard what she'd heard. But the terror in Mrs. Chin's eyes suggested that acknowledging the truth might be more dangerous than pretending it was imagination. The dining room was set for 2. Fine china, crystal glasses, silver that gleamed like captured sunlight. Thomas sat at the head of the table, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. He looked up as she entered, and his smile was warm as summer honey. Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood. I trust you slept well. The casual question, delivered as if she hadn't just witnessed something impossible, made her want to scream. Instead, she took the chair Mrs. Chun indicated and accepted a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. I heard sounds. In the night. Coyotes, Thomas said without missing a beat. They get bold when the moon is dark. Nothing to concern yourself with. And the woman in the garden. His hand stilled on his coffee cup. For just a moment, something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Surprise? Fear? Then the mask slipped back into place. What woman? I saw her from my window. Tall, dark hair, wearing white. She looked like. Evangeline glanced toward the portrait above the mantelpiece. Like your first wife. Thomas set down his cup with deliberate care. My first wife is dead, Mrs. Blackwood. She died 3 years ago in a carriage accident. Perhaps you'd like to visit her grave? The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Evangeline met his stare, searching for some crack in his composure. Yes, I would. Something dangerous flashed across his features, then vanished. After breakfast. Then. But first, we have other matters to discuss. Mrs. Chin appeared with platters of eggs, bacon, and biscuits that would have fed a family of 6. She set them down without speaking, but Evangeline caught the warning look the housekeeper shot her way. Your education begins today, Thomas continued, helping himself to eggs. I have certain expectations of my wife. Standards to maintain. What kind of standards? You'll learn to manage a household of this caliber. To entertain guests when the occasion demands. To present yourself as befits your station. His eyes traveled over her worn dress, taking inventory of her deficiencies. Mrs. Chun has prepared appropriate clothing. You'll find it in the armoire in your room. I don't need charity. It's not charity, Mrs. Blackwood. It's investment. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the intensity of a naturalist examining a rare specimen. Tell me, can you play piano? A little. My mother taught me. Good. We'll work on that. Languages? Just English. Pity. French would be useful. Never mind. We'll focus on deportment, conversation, the social graces. You have potential, Mrs. Blackwood. Raw material that can be shaped into something remarkable. The way he said it made her skin crawl. I'm not a lump of clay for you to mold. Aren't you? His smile was sharp as a blade. I paid $100 for you. That makes you mine to shape however I see fit. Fury rose in her throat like bile. You bought the right to marry me, not the right to remake me. In this territory, Mrs. Blackwood, those are the same thing. He stood, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. Finish your breakfast. We have a grave to visit. The cemetery sat on a hilltop behind the house, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that had seen better days. Weathered headstones jutted from the earth like broken teeth, some so old their inscriptions had been worn smooth by wind and rain. Thomas led her to a newer grave near the back, its marble headstones still white as fresh snow. Helena Blackwood, beloved wife, 1845 to 1881. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty, Keats, Thomas said quietly. She loved poetry. Evangeline knelt beside the grave, noting how the earth around it was disturbed, as if something had been digging or clawing its way out. How did she die? The carriage went over Devil's Drop during a storm. They never found her body. His voice was carefully neutral. I had her declared dead after a year. You buried an empty coffin. I buried my grief, Mrs. Blackwood. Sometimes that's all a man can do. A gust of wind sent dead leaves skittering across the headstone, and for a moment, Evangeline could swear she heard laughter, wild, joyous, tinged with madness. She looked up to find Thomas watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You seem troubled, he said. This place. She gestured vaguely at the cemetery, the house, the entire godforsaken mountaintop. It doesn't feel right. Right is a luxury we can't afford, Mrs. Blackwood. We make do with what we have. He offered his arm. Come. Mrs. Chun has laid out your new wardrobe. We'll begin your lessons this afternoon. As they walked back toward the house, Evangeline caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. A figure in white, standing among the headstones, watching them with eyes that burned like winter stars. But when she turned to look directly, there was nothing there but shadows and the whisper of wind through dead grass. But as they reached the house, Evangeline discovered something that made her blood run cold. Fresh rose petals scattered across the threshold and carved into the wooden door frame. So faint she almost missed it were the words, "She's coming home." The transformation was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Evangeline barely recognized herself in the gilt-framed mirror. The emerald silk gown Mrs. Chun had laid out fit her perfectly, too perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Exact measurements. The neckline was modest but elegant, the skirt cut in the latest fashion. Even the undergarments were finest quality, imported lace that whispered against her skin like secrets. You look like a lady now, Mrs. Chun said, but her voice held no warmth. Mr. Thomas, he will be pleased. These belonged to her, didn't they? Evangeline touched the delicate fabric. To Helena. Mrs. Chun's hands stilled on the pearl buttons. She was fastening. Mrs. Helena. She was particular about her things. She know like anyone touching them. But she's dead. Dead is complicated word. Mrs. Chun's reflection in the mirror was pale as moonlight. Some people, they hold on too tight, even after. A chill ran down Evangeline's spine. What do you mean? But Mrs. Chun was already moving away, gathering up Evangeline's worn dress with the efficiency of long practice. You go to Mr. Thomas now? He waiting in the music room. The music room was a shrine to refinement. Burgundy velvet curtains, oil, paintings of pastoral scenes, and at its center, a magnificent rosewood piano that gleamed like dark water. Thomas stood beside it, immaculate in his black suit, his silver pocket watch catching the lamplight. Exquisite, he murmured, his gray eyes drinking in every detail of her appearance. The gown suits you perfectly. It's beautiful, Evangeline admitted, though wearing another woman's clothes made her feel like she was playing dress-up in a mausoleum. Helena had impeccable taste. His fingers trailed along the piano's polished surface. She could make this instrument sing like an angel. Perhaps you'll prove equally talented. The way he said it made her stomach clench. I'm not Helena. No, you're not. His smile was sharp as winter wind. But you could be, with proper guidance. He gestured to the piano bench. Sit. Show me what your mother taught you. Evangeline's hands trembled as she placed them on the keys. The ivory was cold beneath her fingers, cold as bone. She began a simple hymn her mother had loved. but the notes that emerged were wrong, discordant, mournful, as if the piano itself were weeping. "Stop." Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. That's not. That's not what Helena played." "I'm not Helena," Evangeline repeated, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Try again." His hand settled on her shoulder, grip firm enough to bruise. Something beautiful, something she would have chosen. As if her fingers had a mind of their own, Evangeline found herself playing a waltz, complex, haunting, far beyond her skill level. The melody poured from the piano like liquid sorrow, each note perfect despite the impossibility of it. She'd never heard this piece before, yet she knew every measure, every subtle variation. "Yes," Thomas breathed. "Yes, that's it exactly." The music swelled, filling the room with ghostly beauty. But as the last notes faded, Evangeline realized she wasn't alone at the piano. A presence pressed against her back, cold as winter, guiding her hands with spectral fingers. She jerked away from the keys, gasping, "I can't do this. I won't be her replacement." "You already are." Thomas's voice was silk over steel. "The moment you put on that dress, sat at that piano, you became mine to shape." Helena understood that. "In time, you will too." "Helena is dead." "Is she?" His eyes glittered with dangerous amusement. "Are you so certain?" Before Evangeline could respond, a crash echoed through the house. The sound of breaking glass, followed by Mrs. Chin's terrified scream. Thomas's face went white as parchment. "Stay here," he commanded. But Evangeline was already moving, hiking up her silk skirts to run after him. They found Mrs. Chun in the kitchen, pressed against the far wall, her face a mask of terror. Every piece of china in the room lay shattered. On the floor, cups, plates, serving bowls, as if an invisible hand had swept them from the shelves in a fit of rage. "She's angry," Mrs. Chin whispered. "She know about the dress. She know about the piano." "Who's angry?" Evangeline demanded. Though she already knew the answer, Thomas moved through the debris with careful steps, his eyes scanning the destruction. "Helena always did have a temper when she didn't get her way. You're talking about her like she's still alive. Death is just another room in the house, Mrs. Blackwood. Some people refuse to stay in it." He picked up a shard of blue china, examining it with detached interest. "She's been restless since you arrived." "This is madness." "Is it?" Thomas's smile was terrible to behold. "You've seen her, haven't you? In the garden, by the cemetery. You felt her presence." Evangeline's denial died on her lips. She had seen, had felt. The cold touch at the piano, the figure in white, the sense of being watched from every shadow. "What happened to her?" she whispered. "Really happened?" Thomas set down the china shard with infinite care. "Helena was complicated, beautiful, talented, but hungry for things that couldn't be satisfied. When she couldn't have what she wanted, she became difficult. You killed her. I defended myself." His voice was calm as still water. "She came at me with a carving knife, screaming about how I'd ruined her life, trapped her in this house. The struggle was brief. And the carriage accident, a convenient fiction, much easier than explaining why my wife's body was buried in the old mine shaft on the north slope." He studied Evangeline's horrified expression with scientific interest. "But the dead don't rest easy when they've been wronged, Mrs. Blackwood. Helena's been waiting for someone to take her place. Someone to complete what she started." The temperature in the room plummeted. Evangeline's breath came out in visible puffs as frost began forming on the windows. Mrs. Chun whimpered and crossed herself. "She's here," Thomas said conversationally. "She's been growing stronger since you arrived, feeding on your fear, your confusion. Soon she'll be strong enough to." His words were cut off by a sound that made Evangeline's blood turn to ice. Laughter, wild and joyous and completely mad, echoing from the walls themselves. The remaining glasses on the shelves began to vibrate, their rims singing in harmony with the ghostly mirth. "Run," Mrs. Chin gasped. "Run now, before she—" The laughter stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, they heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate. Coming closer, Thomas's face was pale as bone. "She's never been this strong before. Never this corporeal." "What does she want?" Evangeline whispered. "What she's always wanted." His gray eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine fear there. "To live again. And she's decided that your body will do nicely." But as the footsteps reached the kitchen door, Evangeline realized that running might no longer be an option because the door handle was already turning and what stepped through was no longer entirely human. The thing that had once been Helena Blackwood stood in the doorway like a fever dream made flesh. She was beautiful and terrible, skin pale as moonlight, dark hair flowing like liquid shadow, eyes that burned with the cold fire of winter stars. The white dress clung to her form, but where fabric should have been solid, Evangeline could see through it to the kitchen wall beyond. Most horrifying of all was her smile, radiant as a bride's, mad as a rabid wolf's. "Thomas, darling." Helena's voice was honey poured over broken glass. "You didn't tell me we were having guests." Mrs. Chun pressed herself deeper into the corner, muttering prayers in Chinese. Thomas stepped protectively in front of Evangeline, his face a mask of desperate control. "Helena, you need to rest. Go back to my grave." Helena's laughter was like wind chimes in a hurricane. "But I'm not tired anymore, beloved. I have so much energy now. So much purpose." Her burning gaze fixed on Evangeline. "And such a lovely new dress to wear." "You can't have her." Thomas's voice was steady, but Evangeline could see his hands trembling. "She's done nothing to you." "Nothing." Helena glided forward, her feet not quite touching the shattered china. "She's wearing my gown, playing my piano, sleeping in my house, living my life." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. But that's about to change. Evangeline's mind raced. The ghost was powerful, but not invincible. Thomas's fear proved that. And there had to be a reason Helena had waited 3 years to make her move. Why she needed Evangeline specifically. "You're weak," Evangeline said suddenly. The words came out stronger than she felt. "If you were truly powerful, you wouldn't need my body. You'd have your own." Helena's perfect composure cracked slightly. "Clever little mouse. But cleverness won't save you." "Maybe not. But the truth might." Evangeline stepped around Thomas, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. "You're not angry about the dress or the piano. You're angry because he replaced you. Because he moved on." "I never moved on." Thomas's voice cracked. "Everything I did was for her memory, to keep her close. By buying another woman?" Evangeline's revelation hit like lightning. "By trying to remake me in her image? That's not love, Thomas. That's obsession." Helena's form flickered, becoming more transparent. "He promised to love me forever, to never forget. And he hasn't forgotten." Evangeline continued, understanding dawning like sunrise. "But he's trying to replace you instead of letting you rest. He's keeping you trapped here with his guilt and his twisted devotion." Silence. Helena shrieked, her form blazing. "Brighter. You know nothing of our love." "I know enough." Evangeline pulled off the emerald silk gown, letting it pool at her feet. She stood in her chemise, shivering but defiant. "I know you deserve better than this half-life. And I know I deserve better than being a ghost's understudy." Thomas stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "What are you doing?" "Setting us all free." Evangeline turned to Helena, whose beautiful face was contorted with rage and confusion. "You want to live again? Then live. But in your own body, your own life. Not mine." "Impossible," Helena whispered. "I'm dead. Buried. Gone. Your body is gone. But your soul." Evangeline's mother had always said spirits lingered when they had unfinished business. "What keeps you here? What won't let you rest?" Helena's fury crumbled, revealing the broken woman beneath. "He said he loved me. Then he locked me in this house like a beautiful bird in a cage. I died hating him, and that hate, it burns. It consumes. I can't let go." "Then don't." Evangeline's words surprised even herself. "But don't let it consume." "Me too." "You want revenge on Thomas? Take it. You want him to understand your pain? Show him. But leave me out of it." "Evangeline, no." Thomas stepped forward, desperation naked in his voice. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." She met his gray eyes without flinching. "You didn't buy a wife at that auction, Thomas. You bought a replacement for the woman you killed. Well, here she is. Deal with her yourself." Helena's laughter was like silver bells tolling for the dead. "Oh, little mouse. You are clever indeed." Her burning gaze shifted to Thomas. "Yes, let's settle this between us, shall we? The way we should have 3 years ago." The kitchen erupted into chaos. Invisible hands hurled the remaining dishes, scent knives spinning through the air. Thomas ducked and weaved, his face white with terror. But Helena wasn't trying to kill him. She was showing him what she'd endured, the helpless rage of being trapped, controlled, shaped into something she wasn't. Stop. Thomas fell to his knees among the debris. Please, Helena. I loved you. I still love you. Love. Helena's voice was broken glass and winter wind. You love the idea of me. The perfect wife you tried to create. But I was never perfect enough, was I? Never quiet enough, compliant enough, grateful enough for your generous cage. I was trying to protect you. From what? From living. Helena's form began to brighten, becoming more solid. But you know what, Thomas? I'm done being your beautiful ghost. I'm done haunting this house of lies. She turned to Evangeline, and for a moment, her expression was almost kind. Thank you, little mouse, for showing me that revenge is just another cage. Helena faced Thomas one last time. Goodbye, husband. Find someone real to love. Someone who can love you back. The light surrounding Helena grew blinding. When it faded, she was gone, truly gone. The oppressive cold lifted from the room, and somewhere in the distance, Evangeline could swear she heard the sound of church bells ringing. A soul home. Mrs. Chun emerged from her corner, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She's free, the old woman whispered. Finally free. Thomas sat among the wreckage of his obsession, looking older than his years. What have I done? What you thought was love? Evangeline said gently. But love isn't ownership, Thomas. It's not making someone into what you want them to be. She gathered her simple blue dress from where Mrs. Chun had left it folded, slipping it on like armor. The worn fabric felt honest against her skin, real in a way the silk never had. I'm going home, she announced. Back to my father, back to my life, such as it is. But the money, the contract, keep your $100. Consider it payment for a lesson learned. She touched his shoulder briefly, feeling pity for the broken man he'd become. Find peace, Thomas. For both your sakes. As dawn broke over Devil's Ridge, Evangeline walked down the mountain path toward town. Behind her, the Hartwell place sat quiet as a prayer, finally at rest. In her pocket, her mother's Bible seemed to pulse with warmth, and in the eastern sky, she could swear she saw a figure in white ascending toward the light. She'd been auctioned off like cattle, but she was walking away free. And in the end, freedom was worth more than all the silk gowns in the world. If this tale of courage and second chances warmed your heart like a winter fire, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts below. We'd be much obliged for your kindness. And do tell us in the comments, friend, where are you watching from today?